Thank you, everyone, for joining us today as we discuss leveraging customer data validation to achieve compliance and reduce liability. My name is Ashley McCreary, and I'm a marketing coordinator here at Service Objects, and I'll be helping Rob Manser out throughout this webinar. This should only take about 30 to 45 minutes. We will have a Q&A section at the end, but please feel free to put your questions in throughout the webinar in the little chat box below, and we'll make sure we get to them at the end. So here is where I hand it off to Senior Product Marketing Manager, Rob Manser.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. And thanks everyone for joining us. As Ashley mentioned, today we're going to talk about customer data validation, and more importantly, how specifically it can be used to support compliance efforts and reduce your liability and exposure to the many privacy and data privacy and consumer protection regulations and laws that are out there, both global and in the US and Canada. So with that said, I put together a short agenda just to keep us on track. We'll talk about customer data validation and how it works. We're going to talk about why accuracy matters. This was, as I started to put this presentation together, became more and more apparent how real accuracy, how real accurate data plays a real role in regulations here. We have a quick poll we'll talk about. I'll take a couple seconds, maybe 30 seconds. And then we'll talk about how customer data validation supports compliance specifically. And we'll look at some real world regulations and laws and how some of the validation tools that we have specifically work with those laws. And then, as Ashley mentioned, we'll go answer any questions you may have. So without further ado, let's dive in. So data privacy protection laws have been around for a while. In fact, the 1980s were some of the first early ones, but we really didn't see anything really start rolling until we saw the TCPA come out in the late 90s of 1990s. But last year alone, we saw consumer data privacy regulations fined in different, the GDPR, for example, fined Amazon over $800 million for violations against the GDPR. Stitch Fix in 2021 had an $8 million fine from the California Consumer Protection Act. And then lastly, Hyundai had a $19 million violation for some of their violations for the Fair Credit Reporting Act. All of these sort of highlight the importance of maintaining compliance, how costly it is when you don't maintain compliance. And what we're really looking for is a way to give you an automated way to maintain some of your customer data that's as part of the regulation. And so what we're really looking at is, and it's important to remember that these privacy regulations are always evolving. In fact, I feel like it's always a game, it's sort of a one-upsmanship. It's like, who can make a more strict, a more consumer protective sort of policy next? And you're seeing it sort of pop up both nationally and internationally. And so, but what it really always boils down to is it starts with maintaining accurate customer information. And then, as I was saying to Ashley before we started, I was really surprised as I started to dive into more and more of the regulations, how all of them, without fail, required you to have accurate customer information, required the business to maintain accurate customer information. And we're going to talk about that throughout this. So customer data validation, it really enables you to instantly verify and append the customer contact details, and including the name, address, phone, email, and device. And it all happens in less than a second. So let's just take a look at maybe sort of how customer data validation works. So first and foremost, it starts with the fundamental integrity checks. This is where we're going to look at each of the data elements that are provided by the customer. Now, not always are all elements provided, but the more we have, the better we can do. So, and those include, as we mentioned, name, address, phone, email, and device. And by device, we're really talking about the IP address of the device, because IP actually carries a lot of information with it. And we usually shorten this to an acronym called NAPE, which we'll go through here. And each piece of the customer's identity is verified in real time against global authoritative data sources. It ensures that you are always starting with accurate details about your customer. And that allows us then to move on to the next step in customer data validation, was augment and extend. And what this really is after we know the name, address, email, phone, and device are accurate, we're then going to be able to take those data points and add essential information or append additional information to the customer record. That can be anything from maybe the latitude and longitude of their mailing address. It might tell us for some compliance efforts, really knowing if a phone has been ported or not is important, so we can tell you the porting details. We might be talking about, are they using a proxy to access your site? That might not necessarily be a consumer regulations problem, but it's certainly going to lead to fraud or maybe some phishing where people try to extort using these regulations as sort of a background or a backdrop. Or maybe even a free email service provider, maybe in the same vein there. But after we augmented and extended or added these additional data points, then we use those data points in what we call cross connects or interconnections. And really what this means is we use the core customer data with the derived data points that we just had, and then we start to try and put them together. So a simple example might be, hey, you gave us your phone number and your mailing address. Now we're going to look up your phone number's mailing address, the billing address, and see if they line up. Maybe not all points line up. Maybe your address is different, but the city and your zip code are the same, or maybe the name on the account for the phone is different than the name you provided, but the addresses are the same. And so all of those interconnections or those data points that we can cross check against each other allows us to sort of come up with a confidence level or what we call confidence scores or quality signals, if you will. And that's really the next step. It's where we take all of the data that we validated, the points that we derived, and all the cross checks, and we really start to put together what we call quality signals. And this is just a way for us to, at both the individual elements, name, address, phone name, email, and device, and at the overall customer level, we're able to look at it and sort of say, we're very confident that this is who they say they are. Or maybe we are going to look at a piece of it and say, we're very confident about this except for this piece. And so we're going to give you all different scoring elements to allow you to make decisions, especially in the compliance world. You may not care if a phone number is formatted properly, but you do care if it's been ported. So, it depends on what you're using the services for. They have many uses outside of compliance, but in this conversation, we really want to focus on the compliance uses. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of different things that give us poor quality indicators. It could be the address doesn't match. Maybe they're using a free VoIP phone number. Maybe the address they've given you is a vacant address, or they've used a fake name, like a celebrity name, or they're using an address that, a mailing address that is to something like a prison or a freight forwarder, which happens with a lot of fraudulent customers. So moving on, as we talked about, customer data validation, it's all about accuracy, and accuracy matters. And this is what I was so surprised to sort of learn as I continue to dive in. Every regulation that I read about puts the onus of having accurate customer data on the business. And we're going to talk about that throughout here. But so what does customer data validation do? It basically brings together authoritative customer data sets, and then it uses artificial intelligence, and we bring that together and try and figure out if the customer is who they say they are. And we give you back data intelligence that basically ensures that the customer data is accurate and up to date. And this is really required by the privacy laws. It'll verify your customers and identify fraudulent ones. I think that's an important part of this. You don't want to have bad actors in your database, especially when you're talking about compliance. They're there for a reason. And they're going to try and extort is a lot of times what they have. It's like you want to pay a $10,000 fine or a $2,000 sort of extortion penalty to someone. There's plenty of examples of that out there to look at. We also standardize the customer data. That's very helpful for deduping accounts. It's very hard to dedupe an account when maybe you have a misspelling in a name, or maybe a customer uses two different email addresses, one for home and maybe their business address or their work address. So we're standardizing and deduping them so that you can say, Rob Manser gave us permission to call him, and maybe you have 3 Rob Manser accounts. You want to make sure that it's the same Rob Manser across the board. And then lastly, we really, we are big proponents of these customer protection laws and these data privacy laws. And we really want the way these work is if we are all doing the best to have accurate data in our database so that we can protect the customers that are looking for protection here. So customer data validation ensures that you have accurate data so you can perform compliant, or you can make sure you're in compliance with them. And that then protects your brand and avoids some of the costly penalties that you might see. Before I dive into some of the examples of regulations, I thought it might be fun to just sort of take a quick poll and ask you what privacy laws or regulations are you most concerned with or dealing with? There's quite a number of them out there to choose from. Yeah, no surprise there. I mean, these are some of the ones that we definitely see every day. Well, let's take a look at some of these, and we'll talk about how maybe the accurate customer data can help. So, as I've said, and you will hear ad nauseum today, is compliance and customer data validation go hand in hand. And every major data privacy and consumer protection law shares one universal requirement, and I've said it over and over. Businesses are responsible for capturing and maintaining accurate customer data. It's also their responsibility to identify inaccurate and outdated data and correct it where possible. To not do so is to risk being out of compliance and face penalties. I will say that if you are doing your best efforts, if you're doing a show to correct data, whether it's through automated validation services or maybe you have some sort of policy inside of your business to manage bad data or incorrect data or out of date customer data. Those are best efforts, and so it's not all or none. There is a scale here or a gradient on it. But at the very least, you need to have some sort of, the easiest thing to do is have some customer data validation tools in place. And those are going to ensure that your customer data is accurate and remains up to date. It's also going to provide some insights that'll further help your business both remain compliant and with some of your marketing and sales efforts as well, which we won't go into today. But it's not just a one stick to fix everything kind of thing. The customer data validation goes beyond compliance, and so it's not just for one use here. Maybe we'll just dive into sort of the overarching one where we have to maintain the customer data. And so you need to verify your customers, period, the end. And that's where the power of customer data validation comes in. It's going to verify all of the customers' 5 key attributes that they provide, or whatever level they provide. Maybe you're only collecting name and email and phone, so maybe you don't have address or some variation of those. But from these customer attributes, we can derive about 130 additional data points. And we can use those, as we talked about, to cross-validate and correct the customer data, and then provide you with certainty and quality scores. And these scores will provide you with the confidence that your customer records are accurate and up to date. But you can also use the negative side of the scoring to flag things like, oh, we need to either get the customer data updated, or potentially the service has already updated it and it's just letting you know it's updated. Or maybe you're just going to remove them from your marketing and sales efforts so that you're not out of compliance with that customer. So the other thing that maybe we'll just take a quick peek at one of the services. This is lead validation, which is really just a fancy way of saying we're taking all 5 of the data points, whether it's the name, address, the city, the state, and the zip and country and phone. And what you'll see very quickly here, whoops, sorry about that, is it returns a lot of information. So first and foremost, it's that score we're talking about. So 76 out of 100 is a great score. There's probably a reason in here that we'll talk about. It's likely this name and phone don't match. It's why it's saying maybe you want to review it. It doesn't mean it's out of compliance. It just means you might want to review it. And what you'll see is we've corrected some of the address data, or appended maybe the zip +4 on this one. And then we're going to tell you that it's, this is some of the additional data that you might get that maybe not be about compliance, but maybe it's more about mail delivery. So this is a USPS designation that says this mailing address is deliverable and it's a residential address. And then you'll see, as I said, it breaks out each of these into their individual elements. So name has its own score. So it looks like Aki Stankowski is a great name at 80% or 80 out of 100. We would accept that. And the email address, again, because it's a business address and a good mailing address, we gave them 100%. And we would accept that. And IP says, yep, that IP address is definitely listed in Santa Barbara, and it matches the mailing address. It's not a business, so we're not going to worry about that. And then this is where we see where we might want to review the phone. It got a 30 out of 100, and probably the reason for this one is I know Aki, and I know that he no longer lives in Santa Barbara. So this what's coming back from his phone number, his mailing address versus his phone number are separate. So But this is just lead validation again. One of the many tools that we can use to validate and verify a customer. This one, lead validation, does the whole thing. And so, as I mentioned, making sure you have accurate customer data applies to almost every data privacy law and consumer protection regulation. But I thought it'd be fun to look at maybe a couple of the more specific ones. So let's take a look at the TCPA Act, which is the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, which is a US law that regulates telemarketing calls and text messages. And it requires businesses to have prior consent from consumers before calling or texting them for marketing purposes. Um, and one of the challenges with call centers and telemarketers is to maintain TC compliance. They need to know if a phone number is ported. And ported really means that it changed customer or carrier. So, some examples of that might be maybe you're a T-Mobile customer and you become a Verizon customer, so you port your number from T-Mobile to Verizon, or potentially you cancel your landline and that phone number goes back into the Verizon pool and gets reassigned at some point to somebody new. And so both of those are examples of porting. And for call centers and telemarketers, they really need to know the date that there was. Well, first they need to know if it's ported, and then secondly, they need to know the porting date. So we have a number of phone validation tools that can help you identify that. I'll share one of them here. This is Phone Exchange 2. We'll just look at maybe a residential number. Actually, let me go back. Let's just do the is ported one. So we know that this phone number, if you look down here, beside, again, there's a lot of additional information that you can use. But what you'll see down here is that there's a note code that says is ported. And this is going to tell you down here the porting date and where it was ported from. So again, call centers want to know, or telemarketers want to know this porting date, because they have only a small time frame where they can sort of make a mistake and call that number by accident because they didn't know the phone number was ported. But once you know it's ported, you can't call them until you get consent again. So that's how one of our services can support one part of the TCPA. There's many. Let's maybe take a peek at. Let's go overseas. Let's go to the GDPR. GDPR made a lot of news in 2018 and 2019 when it came out. It was definitely one of the strictest consumer protection or data protection regulations in the world. And they kind of set the bar very high. And what it does is it outlines the rights of the individuals with regards to their personal data and how organizations can use it and manage it. Last year, the GDPR handed over 1.6 million euros in fines. Half of that went to Amazon and for the way that they were handling and managing their customer data. What's important to note here and where the services come into effect is the GDPR applies to EU citizens only. But it does also apply to any business that wants to transact with an EU customer. So you have to be GDPR compliant to do business with EU customers, is another way of saying that. So what you want to know as one of the many things for compliance is the person that you're trying to transact with in the EU. And again, this is where you might use address validation, phone validation, or IP address validation. But one of the things that we've seen more times than not with some of our customers is they're most part of this knowing their customer or having their correct customer data is making sure they have the right email address for them, a validated email address, and largely because they have to be able to the businesses need to be able to communicate GDPR level communications to them, and if they can't reach them, they can be held liable. So they need a validated contact point, and a lot of times they'll use email validation as part of that process. I won't dive into that one too much, but you can kind of see here that it's deliverable. We are identifying it as a commercial business mailing address, which actually has a little bit different rules in the GDPR, so you might actually act differently based on that. So GDPR, again, it can use multiple services to help with validating and ensuring that your customer data is up to date, and provide additional insights into, do they live in the EU, whether it's their phone, their IP, or their address. One of those three or all of those three can give you an indication of their location. So let's move on to back to the US. We'll go to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. This is one that we get a lot of requests for specifically around the demographics. When you look at Fair Credit Reporting Act, it's there to regulate the collection, use, and disclosure of consumer credit information. It has there are a number of rules and regulations within it about fair lend that sort of lean into the fair lending part of it. And so all of that is predicated on, again, demographics, where people live, and again, making sure that their address is, specifically in this case, that their address is up to date and accurate. As I mentioned, customer data validation will help businesses stay compliant by providing the demographic information. It'll also identify and correct inaccurate or outdated customer location data. So in this case, we'll take a look at a service we have called Address Insight, which actually provides three different, excuse me, three different elements. It provides the demographics, as we talked about. It will correct the address, and then it will also give you the geocoordinates of it. So the geocoordinates being the longitude and latitude. And again, we're looking for scores here, and so this score is 100 out of 100 for this address, and you'll see that we were able to again use the USPS to say that it's deliverable. We corrected it. We basically added the zip +4, and we added the south to Chestnut, or we confirmed that the south is there for Chestnut. But then when we get down into the geo coordinates, you're going to see the longitude and latitude here, as well as some of the state and county FIPS. These are very useful for the compliance with FCRA. And again, as I said, we also will provide some of the demographic information, mostly household values and incomes in county and state. And all of those are used to maintain the data points, but more than anything, to give the demographic information that helps them stay within compliance with the FCRA. One thing that I did want to sort of take a little extra time to talk about is change of address tracking. This is hard to do. We'll just start with that. But what you really are required to do is whenever a customer moves from one address to another, you need to update. You need to have that accurate new address in the database. And so that's the United States Postal Service has a service called National Change of Address, and it's a service, but it's not something that you can access through an API. So it's not something you can integrate into your business. And so what we have done is layered an API over top of that, along with some of our own logic and intelligence into it. And so we basically created this service where you can then, at whatever frequency you want, check to see if addresses have changed. And so this solves the issue of detecting and verifying change of address for customers. And it happens in real time. And the other important part of it will standardize the addresses for you. So again, the standardization, especially in compliance, is super important because you need to be able to dedupe, and you also need to make sure that maybe there's multiple customers in one household. You need to be able to identify that as well, to make sure that you're protecting each consumer in the household, not the household, as an example. So one other, maybe we'll take one last one we'll look at, and it's not one, it's multiple here. The United States has, of the 50 states, there's about 5 or 6 of them that really have sort of adopted more the GDPR approach to data privacy or consumer protection. They're becoming far more strict. They're way more comprehensive, and they're rolling out. In every state, with the exception of maybe 3 in the United States, in the U.S., have some sort of legislation that either moving forward to sort of bring these new laws into effect. And so you're probably familiar with the CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act, which they just amended at the beginning of this year to make it even more, make it even stronger and more protective. Colorado, Connecticut, Utah, Virginia, and even New York. New York is a little different. They all have these more comprehensive consumer data privacy laws. And again, what they're looking for in this is what we're trying to identify for them. Are you a resident of California, or are you a resident of any of the other states? Are you a business doing business in the state of California? Are things you need to look at. So again, we can look at, in this case, I queued up maybe the geocoding service, which is going to look at this address, and it's going to confirm that it exists. It's going to give you the longitude and latitude so you can map it. It might be that certain regulations might be more geo-restricted, and so you might need to know those. That's a little bit of future proofing. It's also going to provide some of the state and county codes, which can help you know which regulations apply to them. And you can do that programmatically. And so it's just yet another way of understanding where the consumer is, and what state level regulations apply. Currently, the U.S. does not have a national level privacy data law. I'm not sure that there will be one, but it's basically been handed down to the states to administer. And so, like I said, the GDPR, like privacy data laws, are going to become more and more rigid, and more of them. And so it's this need to make sure that your customer data is accurate, and up to date, is going to become more and more pressing as we push through some of these other regulations. So what that really means is you got to stay compliant with customer data validation. Like I said, the consumer privacy laws will continue to grow in breadth and protection, and I think they'll become more restrictive. And the one thing that will remain true is your business will need accurate customer data. And customer data validation is going to enable your business to stay in lockstep with these laws. It's going to ensure every customer record is verified and up to date, and it's going to identify any costly compliance liabilities before they become an issue. So it's not always about, is this customer who they say they are? It might just be, hey, this customer is who we think they are, but we see a compliance flag that we want to investigate. And that might be a customer service issue. It might be that you just programmatically remove them from your marketing messaging because it's not worth the risk. With that, hopefully that's helps you understand maybe the power of customer data validation, and how it can be used with compliance. But I'm open to answer any questions you might have. Ash?
Yes. Like I said earlier, there is a chat box at the very bottom of your screen where you can put some questions in, but we have some coming in right now. So one is, how often should I audit my customer file to ensure that it is up to date?
Great question. It's really about how often do you use your customer file. It really depends on the need and the use case. It's hard to answer that unilaterally, but I will say, we update the data that are powering these services every day, all the time. So we know that there's changes in data all the time. So it's really a little bit of a compliance risk, and how much you are willing to take. We recommend in general, that you validate the customer data as it's coming in. So as you're ingesting the data that's coming into your platform, whether it's through a form or you're importing it from another system or any of those things. So you do an initial validation on the customer data when you first get it. And then what we like to see, specifically around compliance, is depending again on the volume of business you're doing and stuff like that, either a monthly update or maybe a quarterly update, or quarterly update's the wrong word, but a quarterly sort of check-in and customer database. And one thing that we do know is you don't have to check every element of a customer record either. The name doesn't need to be validated necessarily, but maybe a change of address needs to be checked, or email maybe doesn't need to be validated for compliance, but maybe you want to validate email when you're going to send marketing campaigns out, so you get a better performance of your marketing list. So again, in the compliance sort of conversation, I think a monthly or quarterly check on the update on the customer data record is ideal, and especially on first capture. The nice thing about first capture is if you do the integration where it's on the front end, where the customer can be corrected in real time, you're actually letting the customer know that there's a problem with their entry, and they have the opportunity to correct it, which is kind of where you want it to be. So hope that answers this question. A little long-winded.
That is okay. All right. One other one is, how often are your service objects, services updated?
All the time. It's like I said, we have 27 services. They all sort of, with the exception of one or two, they all rely on the core data, which is the name data, the address data, the phone data, email. Email is a little bit different, where there's not a database of email addresses that we check. We're actually looking at the high risk maybe email service providers, or maybe we're looking at a database of known complainers and stuff like that. So email's a little bit different, but the point being, all of those data sets are always being updated all the time across the world from authoritative data sources. It's not, we don't store any of our customers' data. If you want to run 1 million emails through our email validation service, we never see them. It's a black box, and so that data never gets recorded or stored. And so we are going to the authoritative data sets that tell us if this is good data or not, rather than what our customers may or may not think is good data. So
Awesome.
all the time.
Short answer, all the time. Last question. Do you all support Canada's anti-spam law?
Asshole. We definitely support it. There's one thing that we didn't really talk about in this webinar is certification. We are not certified in any of these regulations. That is up to your business to do. You really and so CASL is yet again another consumer protection law. It's Canada's anti-spam law, and we definitely support it. What some of the pieces that you need in the specifically around email is about right to send and stuff like that. But if that email is from a free camp, there's just a number of rules there that email validation can give you data points for, that you can then use to either remain compliant or flag compliant risk. So yes, we support it. We're not certified in it, is maybe a way to say it.
Awesome. Well, if anyone else has any last minute questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box below. If not, thank you, Rob, and thank you everybody who joined us today. Yes, here's all the information. We will be sending out an email with the recording of the webinar as well as the slide decks. So be on the lookout for that. Otherwise, we hope that you guys have a great rest of your day, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you everyone for attending, and take care.
Thanks. Bye.